progression for, say, a Fire TV, which is you've got sort of the lower model, which is HD or 1080p for your television. But if you have a 4K television, meaning it has much higher resolution, you would want one of the 4K versions. And in Roku's case, they have even introduced some sound bars, which is pretty cool, with Roku built into the sound bar. And why would you want that? Well, what's interesting is as TVs have gotten flatter, right? We've seen they're all getting so much bigger now, and they're getting so thin, and they're so light now, which is great and it's cool, and the picture is much better. But a drawback to that is that there's no room for big speakers. And so when we used to have the bigger televisions, we actually had pretty big speakers in there. Now the speakers are getting smaller and smaller, so you buy this huge television and you don't really have the best sound. So oftentimes you find yourself wanting to buy a sound bar to really pump out that audio. But before I show you some of the differences, you notice that the price points here are generally, they start in the $20 to $30 range and go to $100. In this case, there's a soundbar feature, so that's sort of adding into that. But that's generally the range of what we're talking about here of adding a streaming device. And what are the differences in Roku's case? Well, if we take the $29, the $49, and the $99 value, again, this was the HD version. These are 4K versions. You'll notice that these two obviously do 4K, which is the higher resolution, much higher than 1080p. Includes HDR, which is high dynamic range, which is really another way to show very vivid pictures and colors. Comes with Dolby Vision, that's for your audio. And so if you have a sound bar, you're going to want Dolby Vision so that you get that better sound. And so forth. And so you see here it says the Wi-Fi, that the Wi-Fi sort of has a standard strength signal, and this is for longer range. I would argue that you likely would be fine with this entry-level model. I've never heard of anyone not being able to get a good Wi-Fi connection. But in any event, they say that they've got stronger Wi-Fi as you move up. In this model, they have an Ethernet port. Why does that matter? That matters for this or any device. In general, Wi-Fi usually works great, but if you find that it's not working great or you want to eliminate any reason for interference, Ethernet's always the best way to go. That means directly connecting that device to your router. A lot of times you'll see this with gaming systems. So if you've got kids or grandkids or you game, people want to eliminate anything that could possibly add any time to when they press a button that it does something on the screen, particularly if they're playing with somebody across town or across the country, right? And so people like to hook things up via Ethernet. And in this case, it also has a USB port. But I mentioned remotes, right? And so a Roku comes with a remote. They all come with remotes, in fact. But what you'll notice is sometimes the base level models come with a remote that doesn't have the full functionality of the voice interaction. And that's really the difference here. And so really all this is about the remote. And this has a remote, it just doesn't have the voice. And this one does. This one has voice, but also has some other features where you could directly connect headphones into it. So if you just wanted to listen from the remote, that way you're not bothering anybody. But it also has Bluetooth, so you can connect Bluetooth speakers. And in this case, in this model, you can actually plug in the remote to charge it, whereas this one requires batteries. So it's just sort of a little difference in the Roku, and you also do find that with some of the other streaming devices. So next up is Amazon's Fire TV. So Amazon, right where we go to buy stuff, they also got into this business back in 2014, and they also have about 1/3 of the market share. Their devices, as you move up, start with a basic remote, and then it has a remote that also has voice. And if you get one of these or don't have one yet and are going to go buy one, I would recommend to get one with the voice. It's just a much more fun and much more intuitive experience, and it really gives you a lot more interactive features. And it also comes with an app. So just like with Roku, in fact, all 4 of these devices, they all have an app, and you can interact with your platform on your phone and then on your television. You might think, well, why would I want to do that? Well, sometimes it's just easier to search for things. We're so used to looking for things on our phone. Sometimes it's not as easy all of a sudden when you're using, say, a remote and trying to do it. So that's one reason. Another reason might be when you have to enter information. So let's say you're adding an app to the platform. So in this case, let's say it's Fire TV, but it could have been Roku. You download the HBO app or the Netflix app, or you've decided to subscribe to Hulu. And so you add Hulu like you would add Hulu to your phone. You got to enter in information, right? You got to type in your password. Maybe you got to enter in billing information. Well, sometimes it's a lot easier to do that from your computer or your phone versus through the TV, even if you have a remote. And so for things like that, you actually do find it just makes it easier. But I won't really cover all the differences here, but you can generally see at the lower end, this is HD. These are HD here, and then you get into 4K. So if you have a 4K television, you definitely want a 4K stick, and so forth. And in fact, Amazon even sells TVs that are Fire TVs. So the Fire TV is built into the TV that they sell you. And you can get one right now for $120, right up to potentially 40 inches. So I guess it says TV for a 32 to 40 foot room, but in any event. Next up, we have the Apple TV. Now, Apple is a little different from everybody else, but actually, I guess you can say similar to Google's Chromecast. There's only one option. They don't have a bunch of different devices. They come out with one, they sell it for a few years, and then they improve on that device, and then they release that device, and they get rid of the older device. But they started in 2007 with Apple TV and really sort of kicked off in 2010. And it is the premium option, particularly for Apple enthusiasts like myself. So if you're an Apple household, you might find that you're going to just want to go with the Apple TV. It does have arguably the best hardware. It has the fastest chip in the device. And why does that matter? Well, it just kind of moves faster. So when you're flipping around through things, it's just very, very responsive. I mean, the other ones are pretty responsive too, but if you were to compare them, you would notice, wow, this just moves faster and crisper. And it does because it's got Apple's A15 Bionic chip. But a big difference here is that there's only one option, and it's a premium option. And in this case, it costs $129. That's a big difference from $29.99 or $21.99 that you just saw earlier. So for some people, or maybe getting into it, they don't want to start there, but it's definitely a premium option for Apple users. You don't have to be an Apple user to get an Apple TV. You don't have to have an iPhone. You could say, hey, I just want to get this thing, create an Apple ID, which we'll cover here in a minute. And you could use this whole ecosystem. You don't have to be a previous Apple user. And it also gives you access to Apple TV Plus. We mentioned this in the first session. That is an additional streaming service, costs $10 a month, and it's original content put out by Apple of TV shows and movies that you can get, and it's obviously easier to use when you're in the Apple ecosystem. And last but not least, we've got Google's Chromecast. Again, at the end of the day, I would argue if you're a big Google fan and you've got, say, a Samsung phone or you've got other Android devices, this would just make sense to start here or to add this because you're already going to be familiar with it. You're already going to be a user of that kind of that platform and ecosystem. But they started in 2013. And you'll notice it's called Chromecast. And so originally, when Google came out with this, there was no remote. It was just sort of a dongle. It didn't look like this, but it was just a dongle. And you would connect it to your TV and you would cast. This is what is called casting, when you're sending what's on your phone to another screen. So let's say you were showing a video or pictures, or maybe watching a movie on your phone, and you're like, well, I would like to watch this movie on my phone on my television. So what Google did is they created a device that you could connect your phone to. It would connect wirelessly, and then you could cast it to your television. And then over time, Google has also added in a remote, so you don't actually need to be using your phone to interact with the video content. So again, I would argue it's really for those who like Google and Android. And you'll notice their price point is $50, $49.99, and that's for the 4K version. The HD version costs $29.99. So they've got these two options, right? $29.99 or $49.99. Now, before we get into thinking about these devices and how the actual hardware and how you set them up, and you're going to be hopefully pleasantly surprised to find out it's actually really easy to set these things up. But you're going to need an internet connection because you are streaming via the internet, right? And so just as a quick refresher, as of at least this past December, the median download speed in the United States was 227 megabits per second. Now, what does that mean you need for streaming? Well, as we also covered in the last session, Netflix says you only need 5 megs for HD, arguably 25 megs for 4K Ultra. Now, I would argue, though, from the outside, is that you're never doing one thing at one time in your home, at work, or on your network. There's multiple devices connected at any one time, so it's never about the minimum requirement because you don't know what all is going on. For example, I have Ring doorbells. If a car drives by or a person comes up to drop off a package, it's all of a sudden recording HD video. So that's adding to the bandwidth of my network, right? Not to mention other people living in my home doing the things that they do. And so you always want much more bandwidth than the minimum requirement of any device that it says it needs. And the great thing about Highline is that their main plan is a gigabit plan. That's 1,000 megabits per second. So you will be fully taken care of if you're on the gigabit plan with Highline.